Hey, and welcome to another edition of the Wynn Show, where everybody comes to win. It's our desire that in watching these shows, you will see something in our guest that will make you say, well, doggone it, if he can, then I can too. Today's no different. We're going to interview someone who went from hobbyist to jobbyist and talk about the transition and how do you make that happen. So if you've got a hobby that you'd like to turn into your full-time occupation, this show is for you today. Hi, and welcome back to another edition of the Wynn Show. Today in studio, or not in studio actually, we're on site at 1233 Distillery with Kevin Osborn. He and his wife Rebecca own this distillery together. They're located in Little River, South Carolina, and I cannot wait to get into talking with you today. Kevin, one of the things that we do on the Wynn Show is we want our viewers to be able to watch and to see something in you and identify with something in you that sparks in them the oomph to take the step to do something. Like, I want them to look at you and say, well, if Kevin can do it, so can I. And so we're going to talk a bit today about how spirits was your hobby. And so if you have a hobby, you're going to look at Kevin and say, well, gosh, he took his hobby and turned it into a thriving business, an amazing business here. And so we want to hear all about it.
As far as, I'll say, beverage alcohol, it started as a hobby for us. And I started brewing beer right out of college as a hobbyist. I got really into it, entering in competitions and things like that. Wow. After a while, I did that for several years. And then when we eventually moved to California, I was also, I love all things craft.
Okay.
So I've always been into craft beer, craft spirits, and boutique wines. Okay. So when we moved to California, we kind of flipped it and started winemaking.
Okay.
And that grew significantly with some friends that were also wine aficionados, or onophiles as they're called. Okay. We started expanding our production of wine in California. Did that for a while, but about 3 years ago is when we decided to move to spirits.
Okay, so I have to ask this question. You come out of college, you have a job, which is taking you all over the country, you're married, and you're brewing. In your garage, in your bathtub, how did this really start? Like, take us to that first moment, I'm gonna make beer, honey. What the heck?
Well, I mean, really craft beverages, the boutique wineries really started blossoming in the 1970s, and then they've continued to grow since. As you see evident here, right, in the Carolinas and in all states, wineries keep popping up and growing.
Yeah.
California now has 4,800 wineries. It's a huge, obviously, economic driver for the state. And then in the 1980s is when kind of the craft brewing revolution started. And that's kind of when, I really got into it and was appreciating what was very different than your commodity Budweisers and Millers, right? And so, we started doing some, unique types of beer. We started brewing porters and stouts and English special bitters and things like that, and really appreciated all the different styles.
But for real, were you in your garage?
Literally, yeah. Garage and basement, both.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we were in the Midwest at the time, and our home that we had in Virginia had basements. So I did a lot of brewing in the basement. I'd always get complaints from my wife because, when you're mashing malt, it has a very distinct aroma that makes the whole house smell like that. So so sometimes she didn't appreciate it, but we loved it, and we did it for a number of years.
So I really had to kind of poke you a little bit and say, I want to know, did you start in your garage? Amazing things in America starting American garages, right? So we, Apple, whatever. There used to be that commercial where they started in the garage. Yeah. Like, everybody started, I need a garage. I only had a carport, so I was feeling left out. But anyway, so I had to push you a little bit on that one.
As far as the wine development, I had a very good friend, Mark, out in California, who had already been winemaking for 10 years as a hobbyist with his family, basically. We were all into boutique wines at the time, and really wanted to kind of switch over from beer to wine. And so we had other friends. So there were 5 of us all together. We went in and invested in the equipment. We built expanded barrel room, production facility, etc. And we were producing a lot of wine. We did that for 14 years, really right until and still we're still doing it. I'm not there on site while they're doing it, but it was great. We loved it. Same thing. We would enter competitions all the time. So it became a lot of fun. Two of the gentlemen that we were making wine with went and bought a 25-acre vineyard and built a much larger winery called Church Creek Vineyards, and they're doing very well. They make some fantastic products. So our group has shrunk, but about 3 years ago, we were, my wife and I were on vacation. We had already been considering potentially doing spirits, we visited some really good friends of ours up in northern Michigan who we hadn't seen in a while, and they had already been operating a distillery up there called Northern Latitudes Distillery, and operating it very successfully for 7 years. And I got to spend some time with them and really see their full operation, and that was kind of the big inspiration for us. That was kind of the kickoff point that, hey, we really should do this. I think the thing that pushed us a little bit too was that my company, I was an executive with my other company, I'll say my real job, right?
You're really,
exactly. We were being acquired by a private equity firm, and when that happened, they let basically the entire executive team go, which we knew was going to happen. It was forthcoming. We started really considering what's going to be our next step. Like, what are we going to do next? The next, segment of our lives, right?
I love that.
We were passionate about this. It was a new opportunity to do something new. It's about a 3-year process from a planning standpoint, education, certifications, all that to open a distillery. It's far more complex than breweries and wineries. And there's a lot of regulations. There's regulations on all alcohol, but there's more with spirits. It took us about that long to really get everything together. But when we started down the path, we were all in. We pushed all the chips to the center of the table, and we were going to go for it. So it was really a question of where, right? So you asked West Coast to East Coast.
But before you go West Coast, East Coast, I want to sort of hone this in, because for people who are watching who are like, I have a hobby, I really love to, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be, wine and beer and spirits and that kind of thing. It can be whatever your hobby is. Here's what I'm hearing. You tell me if this is a correct recap of what I'm hearing. You have a hobby, it's something you really love to do. It morphs and changes a bit, right? Because it's beer, then it's wine, then it's let's look at spirits. There's some life things that are happening. We're going to be acquired. Our company's going to be, not our company, but the company I work for is going to be acquired. So I know a transition's coming. I think those are all really important things for our viewers to sort of be watching and seeing. Number one is exactly how you start isn't exactly where you finish off. It's a journey, and it has transitions and changes within it. The other thing is that sometimes life is going to say, I look at you as being kind of a bird in the nest of that company, right? That company, that mama bird's going to push you out of the nest. So what do I do? Don't go crazy.
Right.
You look within, you say, hey, here's an idea that's kind of coming, it's in line with what we want to do, and you've been dabbling in. You went into with 5 people into the winery, right? Am I getting this right?
Yep.
So for folks who are watching, see, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a period and a transition, and you step further and further, and you keep showing up. Now, this is what I love. Once you made the decision, all the chips were in. Okay. Now get me from California to here. They had to know that first. If some people are watching, loving you, but they can't connect the dots. I'm the dot connector. I have to connect those dots for you. So now get me over here to the East Coast. This is fascinating.
So we were going to. In fact, we had originally my wife and I were going to open our own winery separate from my group, right? We bought 7 acres on a wine trail. We had already had the plans in place. But once we discovered, the forthcoming acquisition, and at the time we were saying, do we really want to do wine, or do we want to do something else anyway? That was a good trigger point for us. And once we knew for sure the acquisition was going to happen, we put our property up for sale, and we said, let's let's look at other markets, because originally, even in the distillery, we were strongly considering opening it in Northern California. We lived there.
Oh, we're glad you didn't. Tell us why that didn't work out for them, and it's our good fortune.
Yes, and they, we had already looked at specific areas where we were going to locate the distillery, et cetera. Cost of doing business in California is pretty high. And we looked at two markets. Arizona, kind of the Wild West, literally and figuratively. They will let you do anything.
Oh my goodness.
Self-distributing, there's tax benefits, bottle sales, all that, that make it a very attractive state to operate a distillery in.
Okay.
But we actually had relatives in both North Carolina and South Carolina. And in fact, my brother is right here in Myrtle Beach.
Great.
And so we started looking at the Carolinas, and from a manufacturing standpoint, South Carolina is pretty favorable.
Okay, good to know.
But it was really when we looked specifically at the market, California had over 100 distilleries. South Carolina only had 17, and there had never been one in the Grand Strand. And so
Nice.
we looked at the market and we're like, what a great market, right?
Yeah.
It's between the growing local population plus the tourism, it looked like the perfect spot for us to set up shop. So that got us from California to Little River.
Here, I love that. So checking it out, doing the research, having a plan. We've heard that on multiple interviews here on the Wynn Show, have a plan, which I'm glad to hear you all successful business people say that, because I built my business just on the whim, flying it, build it while you fly it kind of thing. So listen to our guest, have a plan. I want to ask you about your name. So 1233.
The genesis of our brand really came around our celebrating our freedom to drink. And our freedom to drink came at the end of Prohibition, when the 18th Amendment was repealed and the 21st Amendment was enacted. That happened in December of 1933, or 12 of 33.
12 of
so
33.
that's where our brand came from.
Okay, super. And you're very big on the Southern spirits. It's premium, it's Southern. You source all of your ingredients from South Carolina, right?
We do.
Tell us a little bit about that. Why is that important to you? Where'd that concept come from? Just what's that all about?
Well, I think it's important if you're, especially if you're involved in craft, right? That you want to be able to reflect the local culture and reflect the regionality of the product that you're making. And we wanted it to be purely South Carolina. So, I wasn't born and raised in South Carolina, but I certainly can do everything I can to make it as South Carolina as possible. And some of the spirits in our portfolio were designed just because of that. Like, we have our Carolina Peach, which is our peach-infused vodka, because peaches are the #1 fruit crop in South Carolina. They're the real peach state, not Georgia.
Not Georgia. And I got to tell you that we have just been kind of out and about town a little bit, and we mentioned we were coming here, and we heard a raving review for your peach. So not just him saying it, but word on the street is it's phenomenal.
Thank you. Well, and same reason we created our sweet tea, right? Is because
and that one we have out here with us,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
This is the sweet tea.
That is as Southern as it gets. In fact, the design of the recipe. So a lot of most of the recipe designs, some of them have taken a very long time to do, but most of them were my designs, right? And we would make changes to the recipe design based on feedback. But sweet tea, I really had no part in, and because of that, or the reason because of that is I didn't grow up in South Carolina. And I wanted it to be reflective of South Carolina. So the good news is I had a whole bunch of staff that was born and raised here. And we had 15 different tea extracts and I'm like, you guys tell me what tastes like grandma's sweet tea, right? And so we narrowed it down to 3, and then I'm like, okay, we don't want it super syrupy because we want the tea flavor to come through. So there's some other sweet teas out on the market that are spirits that are a little more syrupy. This one is a little bit lighter in the sugar, but we wanted to get that right balance too. We wanted it to be grandma's sweet tea. So I didn't make that recipe.
You're giving a whole new meaning to y'all want some sweet tea. Exactly. Oh my goodness, I love that. You want it to be grandma's, and you have your staff to thank for that. Yes. We have your staff to thank for that.
Yes, exactly.
We'll be tasting later after the interview is over. No, taking some of this sweet tea probably home with us.
That's really great.
But the other
Yeah, talk to us.
ingredients
Yeah.
that we use are, we try to do everything locally sourced. So
Okay.
there's a few exceptions to that, but our grains all come from Horry County farmers.
Okay.
We have a milled for us in Conway,
love
which saves
that.
us the mess of having a mill on site, which are very messy to mill our grains. But our molasses comes from, for our rums, comes from Fort Mill, South Carolina. So we try to do everything as locally sourced as I can. Obviously our fruits, you know, when for our Carolina peach, we had to wait on that because we had to wait for peaches to come in. So we got a bushel from a local Loris farmer, and they were delicious, and we cut them up and we infused for 2 weeks, and then we have our Carolina peach. So everything with the exception of our gin botanicals, those come from all over the world. Our juniper comes from Italy. Our cardamom comes from Morocco. You know, so they're sourced from all over. But everything else is pretty much locally sourced.
That's awesome. So you're here, you're a business, and you're giving business within South Carolina. It's the whole homegrown. I love that whole concept. And we have tourists who get to come and take it home with them and take a part of South Carolina, truly a part of South Carolina, a little piece of all the different areas of our great state. So that's pretty fun.
Absolutely.
That's really cool. So what does grain to glass mean?
Grain to glass really just means that we are doing the entire process in-house. So we're sourcing our grains locally, like we said, right? So we get those delivered to us from Conway, and we start out from the grains coming right from the fields, and we take it all the way through the entire process in-site in our production room, where we do our mashing and then our fermentation and then our distillation runs and then our proofing and bottling. So the entire process is done in-house, so we're basically taking it from the grain from the field to the bottle that we sell to you that goes in the glass.
Wow, okay. And if people wanted to come and see that process, you allow the public to come and take a view of that?
Absolutely. So in our tasting room, we have we have a very large 50-foot bar, and behind that we have paned windows into our production area, so you can see the entire process happening, even if you're just coming in to have cocktails. But we also offer tours every hour on the hour, and people come in and we will walk them back and give them a full tour of the facility, explanation of how spirits are made, specifically around how we make spirits and why we make them, how we make them, and then they'll come out and do a tasting. We also have a VIP tour that is held in our hidden speakeasy,
which is where we are right now.
Exactly.
In the speakeasy.
And that also comes with another cocktail. So.
Okay. So if I came and I were to take a tour, and you were to say our specific way of doing things and the why behind that, like look at our viewers and give them that short little clip from the tour that says this is the why we do it our way. What's that little piece? We would hear?
I would say everything is a little different. You know, I mean, every spirit we make is a little different, right? So the why for anything we're doing. So I'll give you one example is our gin, which I'm very proud of. It took a long time to design it. Most people are used to drinking London dry style gins, which gin, to be a gin, has to have juniper berries in it. Gives it that piney essence. A lot of people love that. A lot of people hate that. But we do ours in a very different style called the New American style, and how we selected the botanicals that we use to make that gin makes it uniquely ours. And the same goes for almost every one of our spirits. During the production process, it's not only how we make the product, it's also where it came from, right? So the types of grains we're using, the fact that it is in fact locally sourced, but then as we go through the process, how I make the cuts off of the still. There are different cuts that we have to do, and that transitional cut between what we call hearts, which is the stuff we keep in bottle, and the latter part of the run, which is called tails, makes it uniquely ours, because I'm the only one that'll make that cut, and I draw that line when I get certain flavors that come in. Every distiller can make their product a little different based on where they draw their cuts, the ingredients they use, and how they process.
So everything that comes from here has your thumbprint, literally.
It does.
on it.
Yeah,
You're making those decisions.
Yes, and I'm the only one that
Okay.
will make the cuts because we want to be very consistent in the products we're producing.
I love that. And so here you're what's called small batch.
Yep.
And how big can small batch get before it becomes the next phase? Like how do you stay?
To do a single run, it would be a single batch, right? Which would
Okay.
be there are some very big stills that are owned by craft distilleries.
Okay.
So the designation of the term micro distillery, which is how the federal government designates, and a lot of that's on how much you're producing, which is without getting into all the technical aspects.
Right.
It's done in what's called proof gallons that you produce a year. But on the batch standpoint, it's really, are you doing a single run off of a still, right? And that's going to be a single batch.
Okay.
Some distilleries have really small stills. Some distilleries have really big stills.
Okay.
If you ever get down to Charleston, Steve, who owns Charleston Distilling, along with his wife, just bought a still that's 5 times larger than ours because they're dramatically expanding their production. That's still small batch. Because it's doing a single run, right?
Okay.
Yeah, when you get into some of the big manufacturers, they're running on stills that are called continuous column stills. They'll run all day.
Okay, so the run is more of the designator.
It is.
Of small batch. But you just said, so down in Charleston, they're going up to this 5 times the size of what we have here. But just for us, so how much is in one of your stills?
Great question. We get asked that all the time too. So we'll start out with our mash tun and our fermenters are 500 gallons, and so we'll start out with about 400 gallons of mash, right? Which is what we'll then ferment out, and we get our distilled or our fermented product that we then have to distill, right? So it starts at 400 gallons.
Okay.
By the time we do our runs, our distillation runs, we'll end up with about 30 gallons of what we'll call hearts, which is the stuff that we keep in bottles. Now we have to add water to that, so it'll actually expand it out. But you can assume that we're getting anywhere from, depending on what we're making, 200 to 300 bottles on a batch.
Out of a batch, okay. What's your vision? How big do you want to go, or do you love this size where you are?
We will grow as we need to grow within, I'll say scope of what's possible. I don't have intentions of opening up a much larger distillery somewhere else. People have asked, are you going to open other 1233 distilleries around? And I don't have intention of that. We really we love what we do. We of course want more people to try our spirits because we're very proud of them, and most the support we've gotten from the community has been overwhelming. It's been just fantastic. We just want more people to discover us. We sell both our spirits here on site in the distillery, so people can come in and buy bottles. Obviously, they can taste our products either through tasting flights or through the cocktails that we make that are all designed by our mixologists. Or we are now in distribution too. So the good news is a lot of the local restaurants and bars have picked us up and are carrying our spirits in their restaurants and bars, and we're also in a lot of the larger ABC stores in the area.
Fantastic. So if I love sweet tea, I can get it in a restaurant.
Sure.
And I can pick it up
at your local,
in my local liquor
ABC
store, right? ABC store. Okay, super. I don't know if there's a rule about saying liquor on the air or not. If so, I don't know, and I just broke it, whatever. So everything seems like, wow, that's just such an easy flow, and you had a hobby and a business and you and your wife and la la la. But I know there had to be there had to be a wall at one point, right? That an obstacle or two that had to be overcome. There might be several. But so tell us a little bit about, give us an example of something that you had to overcome, and what do you think, because everybody does run up into something, but what's a piece of advice you could give to a listener or a viewer that would make them say, oh yeah, I'm up against something right now too, but I'm gonna do what Kevin did and I'm gonna da la la. What would be your secret sauce to get, your secret spirit to get over the obstacle?
Yeah, I mean, there are, especially in this type of a business, it is so complex and there's so much required, again, from an education standpoint and registrations and certifications, that it's a lot. And if it's the first time you've went through it, it can be very daunting.
Okay.
But if you love what you do, right, then you have to be committed to it. And you just find ways, right? So there's, my wife at one point became very overwhelmed with everything we were doing at the time, because there are certain pinch points in the design and build out, right, of the distillery, where you're dealing with the bank on, some financing aspects, and you're dealing with your contractor, and oh my gosh, the engineers in the county have never seen a distillery before, so they don't know what to look at. And so there's...
I just had to take that in for a minute. We've never even seen a distillery in the county before. Now what do we do?
Exactly.
I love that. You're pushing everybody's envelope.
Yes,
Great.
well, and so there's a lot of hand holding all the way around, right? And, and if it's the first time you're doing it, it can be very daunting. So, my wife's like, are we ever going to get through this? Like, is this going to really happen? We've pushed all the chips into the table, but are we going to get called?
Right.
And my advice to her was, hey, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you take one problem as it comes up, and you deal with that, and then you move to the next, and then you move to the next, and pretty soon you build up some momentum, and you've finally cleaned up your problems. Now the next day brings a whole other set of problems, but it's
more elephant to eat.
Exactly. But I would say anybody that's looking to start a business from a hobby is just make sure you do your due diligence. Is it really a viable business? Are you going to be committed both personally and financially, because you're going to have setbacks? But if it's your dream, you figure out a way to make the dream happen.
Find a way.
Yeah.
You find a way. You eat the elephant. You take it bite by bite. You just have to.
Right.
And this, I could tell in kind of trying to find you and look behind and see, okay, this is where we're going to go. Your passion for what you do came through so strongly. And sitting with you and hearing you talk about where you make the cuts, and that's your decision to make, and that I can really feel your passion towards that. Like, this is something that you really love, and I'm sure that that's going to come through when we start cracking things open around here. So what I want you to do now, if you will, we've got some great nuggets for our viewers, is let's highlight each one of these products that here and tell us a little bit about it. We've talked about sweet tea a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about this. This is your...
That's our straight bourbon.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so
what's the cool story?
So there's actually we're in full bourbon production right now. We based on the size of warehousing space we have for our barrels, we can produce about 48 barrels a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's plenty for what we want to do, which everything we're making will be single barrel, which means that we will bottle a barrel at a time.
Okay.
As opposed to blending it out.
Okay.
But whiskey takes time to age.
Yeah.
So everything else that we produce here, and we have 9 spirits in our portfolio, were produced on site. If there were products that were infused, like our peaches, that's done on site, and then we bottle it, and we proof it, which is just adding water to get it to the bottle strength, the proof on the bottle. Okay. But our 2 whiskeys that are being produced here won't be released until September of 2022.
Oh my goodness!
Because I won't release any whiskeys until they're at least 3 years old.
Okay.
So what we have today, both our Big Six as well as our rye whiskey, which is called Restitution, were a custom mash that was my recipe, that was made for us by another distillery, not on site, but made to our recipe.
Okay.
So it's very reflective of what we're making here, but it's ready now. But it's the only 2 products that we have that weren't made at this distillery.
Yep. Because you've been here
just over we've been open just over 4 months, but we started our spirits production the 1st of March.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this coming March is the 1 year mark.
Yes.
And that whiskey's going to be hanging out another 2 years.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, I love
Exactly
that.
right,
Okay.
yep.
And tell me about the name Big Six, because everything here has, you've thought about every piece, every product, every name is very intentional, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about Big Six.
Well, so most of the names of our spirits actually have a tie to prohibition, because
Okay.
we're kind of all about that, right? That's
Yeah.
why we're in the speakeasy.
Yeah.
So our vodka is called Intemperance, which is kind of the anti-temperance movement. It was the wets, you know, there were the dries and the wets back then, right? And the wets were pushing really hard to get the repeal. Our JoJo Gin was named after the type of bottle or flask that you'd have to buy prior to Prohibition if you bought gin in South Carolina, because South Carolina spirits were sold through what was called the dispensary system.
Okay.
They didn't have ABC stores back then. You actually had to buy it right from the state.
Okay.
And it was called a JoJo flask. So there's some cool names.
So that's your JoJo.
This is our JoJo Gin, yes.
because of that.
Big Six was named after, really named after the bootleggers. So the bootleggers were the first hot rodders. And NASCAR originated from bootlegging. So
I had no idea.
yeah, so bootleggers were running their moonshine, right? Back on Thunder Road in North Carolina in the middle of the night without the lights on.
Oh my goodness.
And they had to outrun the police. And
Right.
so eventually, over time, bragging rights, right? So the one bootlegger would say, "My car's faster than you. I can drive faster than you," and they start racing each other. And that's how NASCAR originated. It originated from a guy named Junior Johnson, and he was bootlegger.
That's fantastic. Okay. Bootlegger, but like, so all that's coming to my mind is like drinking and driving at high speeds and racing each other and all of those taboos nowadays. But
Yes.
anyway, this is our history, right?
Yeah, so the bootleggers were the first hot rodders, and
Okay.
because they had to outrun the cops, they would modify their cars, right? They had to have stronger suspensions to hold the weight of the liquor.
Yeah.
They had to be able to handle better. The engine of choice for the bootleggers, they nicknamed the Big Six, which was a 354 cubic inch Chrysler engine, because it was the fastest engine at the time before Ford introduced the V8. So that's why we named our bourbon the Big Six.
I love that. And everyone has the story of all 9 of your products.
They do. Probably one of the most unique ones is our Mullet Creek rum, silver rum. So Mullet Creek is right here in Little River, and it was actually the offloading point for rum runners during Prohibition that would be coming up the East Coast. So all the rum was being manufactured in the Caribbean at the time. They would bring their ships up, and they would stay 3 miles offshore, because 3 miles offshore is international water, so they can't be prosecuted.
Okay.
And then runabout, small boats, would be leaving Mullet Creek from in Little River. They'd run out to the ships, they'd pick up the illegal rum, they'd run it back up Mullet Creek to this barn that awaited there, and they'd offload it. And the rumor was that Joe Kennedy would have his trucks waiting, and they would load the rum into the trucks and they'd haul it back to New York.
Oh my gosh.
And that was right here in Little River.
This is history. Tell me, you got one more? Can you just tell us one more? Because I am loving this whole history thing. And I have to say, you and Rebecca probably thought we're making the decision to go to Little River. But with a history like that, I think Little River probably pulled y'all right here and said, this is the place you have to be.
Yeah, and some of it
that's
was
incredible.
Some of it was just dumb luck, because we wanted to be in Little River just because it's a great little community that's growing, and it's a really good place for us from, we're right at the intersection of Highway 90 and Highway 17, so it's a great traffic point, but we're so close to North Carolina, and then we get all the North Strand business. So Little River was really just, again, the community's been fantastic, so it was a great place for us to root. But when we got here, we're like, hey, we have to dig into the history of Prohibition and bootlegging, and there are plenty of people in the Carolinas that were making moonshine back in the day, and Hellhole Swamp down by Charleston, and all that was kind of the hub, and so there's so much history. so much history that we went to the library and we're looking through old microfiche and reading newspaper articles.
I love it.
And it was it's been really terrific.
For some of our younger viewers, you'll have to Google microfiche and understand what all that means. I totally get it.
Yes.
So is there one more like really good local story that you've named after that you could share with us?
So this group, and they were based out of Cleveland, called the Crusaders, formed, and they were instrumental in getting Prohibition repealed. So we had to name one spirit after them.
Yeah,
so
and
that's
so
our
that's your
rum.
spiced rum.
Yes.
Of course, a little spicy, you know,
Exactly.
to be a Crusader. Okay, super. So I want to give you a minute because you giving us this kind of time of yours, we really appreciate. We've learned a lot of things, and I think people would be inspired to act on their own hobbies with this. I want to give you the chance, though, to just look into the eyes of the folks who are viewing and give them your best pitch, like why they need to include visiting you on their, either it's vacation plans because they're going to be joining us from out of town, or even our in-towners. Like, these are your moments. Tell them why.
We would just love people to come out and discover us, right? So we're the first and only production distillery in the Grand Strand, and we're very proud of the products that we're making. And it is really a terrific experience. When you come here, the tasting room, the speakeasy, if you do our VIP tour, and a full tour of the facility from an educational standpoint, we'll walk you through how you make spirits and how we make our spirits. And the cocktails, don't like to brag, but they're pretty darn good. And those were all designed by all of our mixologists that we call spirit guides. So they're not available in the normal recipe book, right? They're all designed, and they're designed to reflect the essence of the products that we're making here. But it is a super fun time and a good break from the beach. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Or from golf, either way.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. And I just have learned so much from you, and I love your spirit guides, your mixologist, your South Carolina, your commitment to everything Carolina is really great. You are wonderful. We look forward to meeting Rebecca as well.
Thank you.
In the co-ownership of 1233 Distillery. Hopefully, as a viewer, you have heard something in Kevin that makes you want to take your hobby to the next level. If you're feeling that little move to action, listen, eat the elephant one bite at a time, and have some sweet tea to go with it. We'll see you next time on another edition of The Wynn Show. Thank you for watching this episode of The Wynn Show. This is Wynn, and I'm inviting you to discover what's possible in your life by joining me in the I'm Possible Discovery program. You can find all the details at bsharp.us/join.